In this video, we're going to discuss the admin section of HZCare. There's a lot here. A lot of it is sort of boilerplate in nature, where you're not going to necessarily make changes a lot, but it's good to know what all is here when you do need to make a change. So let's work through it. The first tab is allergies, and this is a master list of all the allergies you can toggle on a client's profile. Next, we have branches. And if you have multiple branches, you'll see them all here. If you only have one branch, you'll just see the one. And I'm going to click into it because there's some important settings here that we're going to want to discuss. So you start out with your contact info, scroll on down, time zone, EIN, and then you get some options that are not necessarily as obvious. Payroll code. So if you use a payroll software, ADP for example, that requires a company code on their exports, then this is where you would enter it. So you would enter your ADP, for instance, payroll company code here, and then when you go to run the ADP report, that'll populate on the CSV file that you upload into ADP. And other payroll softwares can make use of this field as well. Start day of week, Sunday or Monday. That'll adjust all the calendars throughout the software accordingly. Observes daylight savings time. This is important because if you have an overnight appointment when you're jumping forward an hour or falling back an hour, then this will bill the correct number of hours. So if you had, say, an 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. appointment when the time was changing, if you're falling back an hour, that's going to be a 13-hour appointment instead of a 12-hour appointment. If you're springing forward an hour, that's only an 11-hour appointment. Or you could not observe daylight savings time and it's just going to be a 12-hour appointment. Live-in appointment hours. So a live-in appointment is a 24-hour appointment, but it includes some breaks. So a lot of times you don't want to record that for reporting purposes as 24 hours. You might want to represent it as something different for the number of hours that the caregiver worked. You can make that adjustment there. If you want to set a cap on how many hours a caregiver can work per week, you can toggle that on and set the cap. Bill hourly overnight on first day and live-in overnight appointments on first day. What those settings are about is, let's say you have your week that starts on a Monday, ends on a Sunday, and you have an appointment on Sunday that goes into the next Monday. Okay, so let's say you post for the week. That appointment from last week that started on Sunday ended on Monday. If it bills on the first day, it's going to get included in last week's invoice. If it bills on the second day, it'll get included in the next week's invoice. Bill scheduled time versus checked-in time. Bill scheduled time is going to invoice based on the start and end times that are on the schedule. If you bill based on checked-in time, that'll use the times that the caregiver actually checked in and checked out of the appointment. I always recommend that people leave this setting on bill scheduled time, and then before they post for the week, they go to the check-in section over here, and they look through the appointments to make sure none of the checked-in durations differ meaningfully from the scheduled durations. And if something's out of line, then they can go in, switch that appointment to checked-in time if applicable. But I think it's safer to be on scheduled time in the admin section here as a default, just so you don't have a situation where a caregiver forgot to check in and then they check in hours later while they're still there. And at that point, their checked-in duration makes no sense, and that's not what you want to bill on. Show button to email all invoices after post. It's off by default, but if you turn it on after you post, you'll see a button there in the accounting section that lets you send out invoices automatically to all your private pay funding sources. I recommend people start with this off and invoice their send out their invoices one by one. Just click into the invoices in the accounting section and click to email them individually. Um, Once you get comfortable with the system and you're comfortable with the idea of emailing everybody at once, that's great. Turn it on. But as a first step, it's often nice to ease into it and email them individually. Prepay appointments. So by default, and what most people do, let's say you have a Monday start of week, Sunday weekend at the end of the week, and so you get into the next Monday at this point, you'll post appointments for the previous week, locks in appointments on the calendar, and generates invoices for that previous Monday through Sunday. If you prepay appointments, so you turn this on, you can specify how many days into the future you want to charge the client on prepayments. So if they have any appointments that are on the calendar for, say, the next 14 days, you go ahead and invoice for. And this adds some complications because if you invoice the client for an appointment and then that appointment ends up not happening for whatever reason, client cancels it, something else, then you have to, on the next invoice, credit the client back for that appointment that didn't happen that you previously invoiced them for. And that all happens automatically, but it just can make for some more confusing invoices, and most people don't use this prepay functionality. But it's there if that's your business model. Show appointments on invoices. This is just going to list out all the appointments at the bottom of the invoice. Just gives you more granularity on what the charge is. Nice to have on. Invoice funding source is monthly. So typically people will post once per week. That generates the invoices once a week and generates payroll data for the week. But some people, although they need to post weekly to generate the payroll data, they don't actually want to send out the invoices every week. They want to let them accumulate and send them out monthly. So if you turn this on, then that'll make it so in the invoices tab in the accounting section, the invoices get lumped into calendar month invoices. And then finally down here, you can add a logo for your branch. And this is going to appear on your reports, on your invoices. I've got one on here right now. I could click add to change it to something else if I liked. And that's all for branches. That is the most complicated of the admin sections. These additional tabs get easier. So caregiver categories, these are the categories for your appointments, for your caregivers, and lets you delineate what sort of rate you're charging for the appointment. So I have certified and companion here. So when I create an appointment, I'll specify it as certified or companion. My caregivers that I've created in the caregiver section, I gave them a category of either certified or companion. And I'm probably going to assign a caregiver that matches up for the appointment type as certified or companion. Then when it becomes time to invoice, that appointment is going to charge a rate based on whether it's certified or companion. Now I can override that with, for different clients, different caregivers. You can check out the rate management video for more detail on that. But let me just show you what this looks like if you add a new category, CNA maybe. So in addition to giving it a name, you also go ahead and set the rate that it charges. So the boxes you see here are hourly caregiver rate, hourly office rate, live-in caregiver charge, and live-in office charge. So let me just walk through those. Hourly caregiver rate, if you're an agency, this is what you're paying your caregivers. An hourly office rate is what you're making on the appointment, your margin. An hourly rate billed to client is the combination of those two. So let's say you're paying the caregiver $20 and you're making $10 an hour. you're billing the client $30 an hour, and that's the only number the client's going to see is that total. The individual pieces of it, the 20 and 10, are just for your own bookkeeping. If you're a registry, hourly caregiver rate is what your caregiver is charging the client as an independent contractor. Hourly office rate is what you as the registry are charging them. So in that case, the client knows the individual pieces, the 20 and the 10. The live-in section works similarly, except it's for live-in appointments and it applies to the full 24 hours. It's not an hourly rate, it's a full 24-hour charge. So that might look something like this, for instance. And that's that. We'll move on to checklists. And checklists are what the caregiver fills out on the HZ Caregiver app when they're at an appointment. Some people know it as an activity log or ADLs. We're calling it checklists here. And you can build a checklist on the client's profile. If it's more of a plan of care style checklist, it makes sense to build it on the client, as it's very unique to the client. But sometimes for compliance purposes, with insurers, for instance, you might have a checklist that you want to use for a lot of clients. And so you can build those here in the admin section and then just apply them to the client's profile. If I click add, I can give that checklist a name. I can specify if it's for hourly or live-in appointments, and then I can start building out the requirements. Make breakfast, assist with bathing, and whatever items I need on there, and then I can save it. Caregiver inactive reasons are reasons that a caregiver might no longer be working for you. When you set a termination date for them on the caregiver profile, you can select from these reasons. Caregiver note categories are different categories that you can set on the notes that you write on the caregiver profile. General's on there by default, but you can create more. Caregiver refer categories are going to be the channels that you get your caregivers through. Say by internet, word of mouth, things like that. You can enter whatever categories you like. Caregiver referrers will be more granular than the categories. The specific referrers, people's names on here, or companies, for instance. Caregiver requirements are going to be requirements that you can assign on the caregiver's profile and specify the dates that they need to be renewed by. You can upload images of the license to go with them. And there's a caregiver requirement report where you can figure out what's about to come due, need to get renewed. Client inactive reasons mirrors the caregiver inactive reasons. Set it on the client profile when they're done with you. Client note categories. Again, for your client notes, in addition to the general category, you can specify any other categories you like. And then you have your client referrer categories and client referrers for detailing those referrer channels for the client, and you can specify those on the client's profile. Client requirements are going to be the requirements you can assign on the client's profile, when they were last done, when they need to be done again, and there's a client requirement report for breaking that down. Client teams. So if you have different office workers who are responsible for tracking different clients, then you can create teams for them and assign them in the client's profile. You might name the teams after the different office workers, or in this case, I just have some very generic team names. Descriptors. So this is a list of descriptors which you can toggle on the client's profile, help to build out that client picture. Durable medical equipment is, again, a list of durable medical equipment that you could switch on the client's profile that's pertinent for that client. Funding note categories works like client note categories and caregiver note categories, but it's for funding source notes. Functional limitations are options that you can toggle on the client's profile to sort of build out that client profile, to build out that description for when you're trying to find a caregiver that's going to fit with them. You need to know what the caregiver needs to be able to service. Holidays are a list of all of your holidays so that you can automatically bill at a multiplier without having to adjust the rates manually as they come along on the schedule. So a lot of times as the new year rolls around, you go ahead and specify all your holidays that you want to honor for that year. I've got a 50% multiplier to both the caregiver and office piece of the rate. And I don't have to worry about that as the, Thanksgiving, Christmas roll around, those rates will automatically get adjusted when I invoice. HZ Caregiver is going to be some settings for the HZ Caregiver app. Show financial data to caregivers is whether the caregiver can see what they're earning for the appointment within the app. Collect signatures gives you an extra field where the client can, or the caregiver can collect a signature from the client that, where the client's affirming that the appointment played out as expected. Show care details list is that gives the caregiver access to see the things like descriptors, functional limitations, those sorts of things that we have toggled on the client's profile. Whether that's on or not, the caregiver is still going to see plan of care, still going to see the checklist. This is just some additional information they would be able to see. Verify location for check-in and check-out. This is whether or not you want a geofence to check in. If this is off, the caregiver can check in regardless of if they're there or not. So most people will have this as true, and then you specify how close the caregiver needs to actually be. This is at 1,800 feet by default, but it, depending on how precise you want it to be, you can make some adjustments here. Some states for Medicaid purposes specify different radiuses, and those numbers vary from state to state. Some states don't have one at all. So 1,800 is the default reasonable starting place until you know you need something different. And then attestations. So you can choose to set up an attestation here and what it will be. So for instance, when COVID first hit, some agencies were setting up attestations here where when the caregiver went to check into an appointment, they first had to click through a pop-up that said, I confirm that I don't have COVID. And they would click yes, and then they would check in. And that would flow through to an attestation report here in HZCare where you had a record of the caregiver affirming that they don't have COVID. The import section lets you import data from different softwares. Let's say you had some Medicaid appointments scheduled in NetSmart and you wanted to bring those into HZCare. You can do that there. Invoice footer is what's going to be written at the bottom of your invoice. You can set up late fees here if you want. Lead caregiver note categories, similar to the other note categories we've talked about, but this is for lead caregivers. Lead caregiver progressions lets you specify on the lead caregiver profile how far along things have progressed. Lead client note categories, similar to the other note categories, but for lead clients. Lead client progressions, it lets you show how far things have progressed with the lead client. Locations. These are all locations in Atlanta. You can set up different parts of town for your location, for your city. And you'll assign a client to their corresponding location. And then for a caregiver, you can set up which locations a caregiver will cover. And then if you want to do a filter on locations when you're scheduling, you know which caregivers are a good fit for a given client. Mental statuses is another section where you can toggle on the appropriate mental statuses on the client profile. No need reasons are the reasons for canceling an appointment. Payment methods are the different methods you can select from when you're entering a payment. The default options are ACH, cash, check, and credit card. But if you have a different platform that you use maybe for collecting payments, you can specify that here and select that when you enter the payments. Permitted activity, another client profile section. You can toggle on the appropriate permitted activities for that client. Physicians. This is a master list of all the doctors that your clients might be using. So you tend to have some overlap in doctors. And so rather than specifying the same doctor on a bunch of different profiles and maintaining that doctor's contact information on multiple profiles, having to update it everywhere, you can keep it all here. And you can see I don't have the contact information filled out on this branch, but you should. And so then you select from this list on the client profile. And if you ever do need to update the contact information, you do it in one place here in the admin section. Keeps things easy. Sick days, you can track sick days here, set up how you want to accrue those. Skills, these are skills that you can toggle on a client's profile, things that they might need a caregiver that has a particular skill. And on the caregiver profiles, you can toggle on from the same list the skills that that caregiver can provide. Third-party funding, this is where you would set up your different insurers that clients might be using. And users. So if you have, you're going to have your own name here for starters as a user of the software. But if you want to add more office workers on here, you would come to the Users tab, you click Add, and then in addition to entering their name and email, you can also give them a role of standard, branch admin, or company admin. Branch admin is going to give them access to certain parts of the admin section. So a standard user wouldn't have access to the admin section at all. A branch admin would have access to admin tabs that affect a given branch, but some of these that apply to all of your branches, they wouldn't have access to. A company admin would have access to the entire admin section, and they would also have access to log in to all of your branches. Now, a standard user or a branch admin by default is just going to have access to the branch that you're logged into when you create them. But if they need to have access to multiple branches, say standard user is going to be doing some scheduling for different branches, you can toggle on whatever other branches you need them to have access to here and then hit save. So that's it for the admin section. There's a lot here, but most of the time you're not going to be making changes here so often. This is just a nice reference so you can look back and get a feel for what's here. All right, have a good one.